The day I stopped trusting my own father was the day I found a locked suitcase in our attic. My name is Carter Fields. I'm 37 years old. I used to serve as a logistics officer in the U.S. Army, but these days I fix trucks in a small-town garage that used to belong to my dad. Life used to be simple, clear. I grew up thinking my father, General Edward Fields, was the definition of honor. He served 4 decades in the military-led battalions, trained cadets, received medals, and folded flags for fallen soldiers. To me, he was a rock. A man whose word was law and whose handshake meant more than a contract. After he passed from pancreatic cancer last spring, I felt like my anchor had finally let go. I returned to his old home to clean things up, maybe find something of his I could keep close. I wasn't expecting anything major. Maybe a journal, a service medal tucked into a drawer, some dusty uniforms. But what I found under the floorboards of the attic, what I pried loose with a crowbar and opened with a shaky hand, changed everything I believed about him. The suitcase was old, military issue, heavy. It clicked open like it had been waiting for years. Inside, rows of neatly arranged folders, each one marked with strange codes, initials, and dates. I recognized some names. Church members, veterans. All of them are elderly. All of them are now dead. My chest tightened. My head pounded. Why would my father have this? Why were there photos, financial records, files on people I barely remembered from potlucks and prayer circles? In that moment, I didn't know what I was looking at. But something inside me shifted. It wasn't grief. There was doubt. For the first time in my life, I looked at my father's legacy and felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. Edward Fields was the kind of man people saluted even out of uniform. He served 38 years in the U.S. Army, rose through the ranks with a mix of grit, discipline, and a deep belief in service. My father believed in rules, in showing up early and standing straight when the anthem played, and in honoring God with every breath he took. He was a man of rituals. Morning prayer before coffee. Ironed shirts on Sunday. Bible verses scribbled into the margins of his journals. If you grew up in our house, you knew 2 things were sacred: this country and the Lord above. My sister and I used to joke that we'd have to swear in just to get extra allowance. But behind that formality, my dad had a warmth that surprised people, especially when he was with Grant. Pastor Grant Milburn had been my father's best friend since their days in the 82 and Airborne. Back then, Grant was a military chaplain. He'd sit with the wounded, hold hands with the dying, and deliver field sermons with nothing but a pocket Bible and a voice that could hush a crowd. When they both retired in their early 60s, Grant settled in our town and took over the pulpit at Westfield Baptist Church. It felt natural, like the next chapter was already written. To me, Grant was Uncle Grant. He brought us casseroles when Mom died, read scripture at her funeral, and cried harder than I did when they folded her flag. Every birthday he'd show up with a joke card and some ridiculous gift. Once it was a singing bass that still haunts me. He baptized my daughter Emma in the same creek where he once saved a soldier from drowning. He held her tiny hand like it was made of glass. Over the years, Grant became more than just a friend of the family. He was woven into it. Sunday dinners, Thanksgiving prayers, quiet talks on the porch with my dad that always ended in laughter and soft words about faith. When I came back from my second tour, raw and unsteady, it was Grant who sat across from me in that dim church office and said nothing for 20 straight minutes. Just sat. Just let me breathe. He was the kind of man people confided in. Birthdays, asked about your mother, and knew the name of your dog. He kept small candies in his coat pocket for the kids and wore a faded watch that once belonged to a fallen comrade. People trusted him without question. And honestly, I did too. It wasn't just the way he spoke. It was the way he listened. You could tell him anything. Your doubts, your regrets, your secrets. And he'd nod, maybe pray with you, maybe tell a story about some soldier who felt the same way. My father used to say Grant had a way of bringing peace just by standing still. I believed that. So did the rest of the town. A thought that a man like that could ever harm. It just didn't make sense. It didn't even seem possible. But now, standing in that attic holding files with my name in the margins, my hands shook. My chest got tight. Because if there was one man in this world I would have sworn on my life was good, it was Grant Milburn. And suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. The lawyer slid the envelope across the table like it was nothing. Just paper, he said. Just formalities. But I felt the weight of it the moment it touched my hands. My sister Claire sat beside me, quiet, her fingers curled tight around her coffee cup. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both felt it. Something was off. I opened the will, slowly expecting the usual. Maybe a split of the estate. Maybe a few heartfelt letters from Dad tucked inside. Instead, what we found was a punch to the gut. My father had left every cent, his house, his savings, his pension, his medals, to Westfield Baptist Church, to Pastor Grant. Claire and I were mentioned just once near the end, each receiving a symbolic inheritance. For me, it was a watch. For her, a signed copy of his field notes. That was it. I blinked at the paper, read it twice, 3 times. My hands felt cold. Claire said nothing, but I could see her jaw tighten. It didn't make sense. Dad loved us. He talked about setting up funds for our kids, about leaving the house to me and keeping the land in the family. We'd spoken about it last Christmas when he still had strength in his voice. But this will was dated just 2 weeks before he died, right after his last surgery, when the morphine kept him floating in and out of reality. The lawyer said the signature was valid, notarized, witnessed, legal. He kept using that word, legal, but nothing about it felt right. This wasn't my father's voice. Not the man who saluted the flag every morning and kissed our mother's picture every night. This felt planted, pushed, done while he was weak and alone. I walked out of that office with my father's watch and a stack of questions. Questions no one seemed eager to answer. Not the lawyer, not the church, and definitely not Pastor Grant. The attic smelled like dust and old wood, the kind of smell that lingers in your clothes and settles behind your eyes. I hadn't been up there in years, not since I was a kid sneaking around where I wasn't supposed to be. But now, climbing that rickety ladder with a flashlight in one hand and a garbage bag in the other, I wasn't looking for memories. I just wanted to clean out the past. Most of it was what you'd expect. Boxes of military records, Christmas ornaments from a decade ago, a couple of faded photo albums. But then behind a broken trunk, I noticed a sliver of green canvas sticking out from under a loose floorboard. It took a crowbar and a lot of cursing, but eventually I dragged out an old army-issue suitcase. Heavy, locked, forgotten. The lock gave after a little pressure, and when the lid creaked open, my heart actually stopped. Inside were folders, dozens of them, each one labeled by hand, neat block letters sorted by last name. There were pictures, handwritten notes, copies of wills and tax documents. All of it organized like a case file, like evidence. And then I saw it. The binder, black leather cracked along the spine. It didn't have a name, just a sticker with the word finals. I opened it and flipped through the first few pages. Each one was a profile. Age, health status, military background, church involvement, notes about family connections or the lack of them. It read like some twisted recruitment list. But the worst part wasn't the data. It was the names. I recognized them. Mr. Sturgis, Miss Evelyn from the choir, Mr. Rayner, who used to hand out peppermints to the kids. They were all gone now. Passed peacefully, the obituaries said. But every one of them had something in common. They'd left everything to Westfield Baptist Church. I felt sick. My stomach turned cold. I sat there in the half-light of the attic binder, open across my lap, and knew deep down this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fluke or a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, a system. And my dad, he wasn't the only one. The binder had dates going back over a decade. It tracked people, vulnerabilities. It even had follow-up notes, like someone was checking in on the results. I turned to the final page and saw my father's name highlighted. Next to it, one word completed. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard. I stared at that word until it blurred into the paper. Completed. Like he was a task. A checkbox. Not a man. Not a soldier. Just another target in a long line of forgotten lives funneled into one place. That's when the fear shifted. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was rage. And something colder than either. Because now I knew I wasn't just the victim of bad will. I was staring straight into the heart of something far bigger. Something calculated. And I had no idea how deep it went. I didn't go back to the church right away. I spent a week staring at that binder, flipping through every page, rereading every note, trying to talk myself out of what I already knew. But every night, I couldn't sleep. I heard my father's voice in my head. The way he used to talk about loyalty, about watching each other's six. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he hadn't just been betrayed. He'd been hunted. I waited until a Friday night service. Just enough people around to keep eyes distracted, but quiet enough that no one would question me hanging back in the shadows. I knew that church better than most. I'd been crawling through its vents as a kid, helping Dad fix loose panels when he volunteered for maintenance. And I remembered something, a narrow hallway behind the pulpit one, that used to lead to a storage room they sealed up after a renovation. I slipped in after everyone left. Lights off. Tools in my backpack. I moved with quiet hands and a racing heart. The hallway looked just like I remembered. Except now there was a keypad lock on the old utility door. I crouched, pulled out a small scanner, and prayed my training hadn't gone completely rusty. After a few minutes of trial and error, the green light blinked. The door clicked open. What I saw made my stomach lurch. The storage room wasn't storage anymore. It had been transformed into a fully operational office. 2 computer towers hummed softly against the far wall. A filing cabinet stretched from floor to ceiling. Shelves lined with external drives. A single desk lamp lit a corner of the room where papers were stacked in perfect order. There was even a small safe beneath the desk, the door slightly ajar. I walked in, slowly, trying to process it all. There were folders with names, lots of them. Many matched what I'd seen in the black binder. Each one had its own file, cross-referenced with bank statements, medical records, and even psychological assessments. They weren't just stealing money. They were profiling people, finding the vulnerable, isolating them, gaining trust and rewriting their wills in silence. One folder had my father's name on it. Inside was a transcript of conversations, notes about his grief after Mom died, details about his cancer diagnosis, the name of every medication he'd been prescribed. Someone had kept track of his spiritual state, listing him as fully compliant and emotionally reliant on Grant. It made my skin crawl. There were emails too. I accessed them from one of the unlocked desktops. Correspondence between Grant and two others, a lawyer and a doctor. The same names are listed on several other profiles. It was a circle. Each man plays a role. Grant would identify the target and manipulate trust. The doctor would validate mental clarity. The lawyer would finalize the transfer. Then they'd wait. Quiet. Invisible. Until the money came in. I knew I needed proof. Real proof. Something undeniable. So I plugged in a portable drive and began copying everything. It took hours. I kept the lights off headphones and listening for any sound beyond the walls. My pulse never slowed. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps, a whisper. But I stayed. When the downloads finished, I encrypted everything and uploaded it to a secure cloud I'd set up back in my military days. Then I left a backup hidden in my car, just in case. I wrote a report, organized the files, and printed evidence. I knew where to send it. The FBI had a cybercrimes tip line for elder fraud. I sent everything I had with no name attached. I couldn't risk it yet. As I locked the door behind me and slipped back into the night, I looked up at the church steeple, that same cross that had watched over me since I was a child. It didn't feel holy anymore. It felt like a mask, covering something rotten. But I wasn't afraid now. I had what I needed, and I wasn't going to stop. The lock clicked behind me as I slipped into the church one last time. I had come to grab the last few pieces of evidence, some backup files I'd hidden in the boiler room, a final printout that tied Grant directly to a suspicious account in Belize. But I wasn't 10 steps into the sanctuary when I heard the sound, a door shutting softly, then footsteps. I froze. Grant stepped out from the side hallway, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. One was tall, thin, with eyes that didn't blink. The other carried something under his jacket. I didn't need to guess what. Grant looked at me like he'd known I'd come. He didn't yell. He just smiled. Said I'd been busy. Said he'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. My hands went cold. He walked toward me, slowly, voice low, and even like he was still behind the pulpit. He said, I misunderstood. That I was grieving. That this wasn't what I thought it was. He told me to hand over the flash drives. Promised me I could walk away. That my father would want peace. He even offered me money. A lot of it. Enough to disappear. Enough to buy silence. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on him, chest tight, heart pounding. That's when he changed. His voice dropped. The kindness peeled back. He said I was making a mistake, that I didn't know who I was dealing with, that men like me didn't win. He stepped closer and said, if I loved my family, I'd stop now. I looked him straight in the eye and told him the files were already gone. In the cloud. Copied. Distributed. With the FBI. I said he should be worrying less about me and more about the sirens he was about to hear. For a second he didn't move. Then he lunged. Everything happened fast. One of the men grabbed for me, but I ducked and shoved him into a pew. Something metal hit the ground. The other guy reached for his belt, but headlights flashed through the stained glass. Red. Blue. Then voices. Loud. Clear. FBI. Police. Weapons down. Hands up. Grant turned to run, but it was too late. The front doors burst open. Agents swarmed the sanctuary. One tackled the man with the weapon. Another pinned a tall one against the altar. Grant stood frozen, one hand still, half-raised, eyes wild. He looked around like the walls were closing in, like he still couldn't believe this was happening. An agent cuffed him without a word. I stood back, breathing hard, blood roaring in my ears. They pulled him past me, and for the first time he looked small. Not like the man who baptized my daughter. Not the voice behind a sermon. Just another thief in a suit. A liar who used trust like a weapon. As they led him out, he turned and locked eyes with me. He didn't say a word, but I saw it. The flicker of rage, of disbelief, of fear. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I owed him nothing. One of the agents nodded at me and said they'd been watching for weeks, waiting for the right moment. My evidence had been enough, more than enough. They called it the largest case of elder exploitation in state history. I just called it justice. For my father, for every name in that binder, for the truth that had almost stayed buried. The trial didn't take long. The evidence was overwhelming. Grant Milburn was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and financial exploitation of the elderly. His co-conspirators followed soon after. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict came in. Some people cried, others clapped. I just sat there in silence, watching the man I once called family disappear behind a steel door. The media covered it for weeks. Elder fraud cases don't usually make headlines, but this one struck a nerve. The story spread across town, across counties. The church closed its doors. Donations stopped. Investigations opened into other churches, other pastors. People started asking hard questions, and slowly the truth made its way out into the open. Most of the stolen money was recovered. Not all, but enough to return something to the families who had lost everything. I got a portion of my father's estate back. It wasn't much compared to what he'd worked for, but it was enough. Enough to buy tools, rent a shop, reopen the garage he once built with his bare hands. I named it Fields Auto, hung his old drill above the door, framed his photo on the back wall. Sometimes I catch myself talking to him when the place is quiet, asking what he would have done, what he thinks of all this. I know he'd be angry, not just about the betrayal, but about the people who suffered in silence. He always believed that honor meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And I think in the end, I honored that. People still stop by. Some bring casseroles. Some bring tears. One woman said her aunt had been on that binder list. She thanked me for not walking away. I told her the same thing I remind myself every morning. That truth has weight. It presses down. It doesn't go away until it's spoken out loud. This wasn't the legacy I expected. It wasn't land or medals or money. It was justice. It was clarity. It was knowing that my father, even in death, helped expose something dark, and through that, gave others the chance to heal.